The Harper family's house stood like any other on Willow Lane, neat, well-kept, and seemingly ordinary. The lawn was freshly mown, the mailboxes aligned like soldiers, and every window sparkled under the mid-morning sun. To a passerby, Sarah and Michael Harper were the picture of suburban normalcy, a dedicated nurse and a diligent software engineer, raising their teenage son Ethan in a quiet, comfortable neighborhood. Yet beneath the surface of this ordinary life, subtle cracks were forming, unnoticed by the family, but observed keenly by a presence no one suspected. Sarah Harper hummed quietly as she wiped down the kitchen counters. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the faint aroma of pancakes sizzling on the stove. She glanced toward the hallway, where the faint glow of sunlight filtered through the blinds, and smiled as Ethan's voice drifted up from the living room. "Mom, I can't find my headphones again." Sarah frowned but maintained her calm. "Check the floor by the couch, honey. You probably left them there." A small shuffle, a mumbled "thanks," and the day proceeded as usual, or at least as usual as life could be in a house that was slowly being observed from the shadows above. For months, a stranger had been living in the Harper attic, quietly moving among the rafters, learning the rhythms of this family's life. The presence had never been noticed, no broken floorboards, no missing possessions significant enough to raise alarms, and yet the stranger was always there, sometimes merely watching, sometimes subtly shifting objects to remind the family that their lives were no longer entirely their own. Sarah washed the dishes with a sense of vague unease. It was nothing she could articulate. Perhaps it was fatigue from her long night shift at the hospital, or perhaps it was something else entirely, something that had been lingering in the edges of her mind for weeks. Occasionally, she thought she heard a faint creak overhead, a sound that didn't belong to the house settling or the wind outside. Each time she paused to listen, the sound disappeared, leaving her to doubt her own senses. Michael entered the kitchen, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, briefcase in hand. "Morning," he said, planting a kiss on Sarah's cheek. "Coffee's ready?" "Yep, right here," she said, gesturing toward the steaming mug. She watched him take a sip, the way he always did, careful, methodical, as if savoring each swallow. Little did he know, the stranger above them had memorized that exact routine weeks ago. Every nuance, every small habit had been observed. Ethan bounded down the stairs, headphones in hand, oblivious to the quiet tension. "I thought I left them on my desk, but... weird." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Weird what?" "Nothing," Ethan muttered, shrugging. He shook his head, convinced he was imagining things, but he wasn't. Somewhere above, a faint shuffle, a barely perceptible sigh hinted that they were not alone. The morning unfolded normally, yet with small disturbances that could have been dismissed as forgetfulness. Sarah noticed a single sock out of place when she folded laundry. Michael thought he left his keys on the counter, only to find them tucked behind a flower vase. Ethan's school backpack seemed lighter than usual, though nothing was missing, at least not that he could see. Each family member had these minor encounters with the inexplicable, yet none questioned them seriously. It wasn't until that evening that the first real sign of intrusion occurred. The family sat down for dinner, casual conversation flowing, when a faint sound came from above, a rhythmic tapping, soft and irregular, like someone pacing on the attic floorboards. Sarah froze mid-bite, her fork hovering above her plate. "Do you hear that?" she asked quietly. Michael frowned. "Hear what?" "That tapping upstairs. I think it's coming from the attic." Probably just the house settling, but his tone lacked conviction. Even he had a fleeting moment of doubt, a recognition that the sound had a rhythm too deliberate to be natural. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "It's—" "Stop imagining things," Michael interrupted, trying to maintain calm. The conversation moved on, but a subtle sense of unease had taken root. Later that night, Sarah lay in bed staring at the ceiling. She thought she saw a flicker of movement, a shadow darting across the attic hatch. She closed her eyes and chalked it up to imagination. Michael was asleep beside her, unaware, breathing steadily, and Ethan's room was silent. But the faint creaks persisted, almost imperceptibly, as if someone were moving just above their heads, careful not to be seen. The stranger's world above the attic was a careful, controlled space. They had fashioned a small living area hidden beneath old boxes and forgotten belongings, perfectly camouflaged from anyone walking below. A thin blanket, a small pile of canned food, a few bottles of water, and items stolen from the Harper home, a pair of socks, a notebook, a family photograph. It was a modest existence, but it gave the stranger access to the intimate life of the family below, from their daily routines to their secrets. And the stranger watched, always observing how Sarah moved in the kitchen, how Michael sipped his coffee, how Ethan laughed at his phone. Every detail cataloged, every small habit memorized. Months of observation had gone unnoticed, yet each day brought new information. The night deepened and the house grew still, the kind of still that seems to amplify every small noise. A floorboard creaked in the living room, a faucet dripped in the kitchen, and then a whisper of movement above. The stranger shifted, careful, deliberate, savoring the knowledge that the family slept below, unaware of the intruder in their midst. As Sarah drifted into a restless sleep, she had no idea that this was only the beginning. The stranger in the attic was patient, and patience was a key part of their plan. The Harper family's perfect illusion of safety and normalcy would continue, for now, but the shadows above were alive, and the calm of the house was only temporary. For the first time, Ethan awoke to a sound that made his stomach twist, a low scrape, as if something heavy had shifted just above his head. He froze, listening. His instincts screamed that something wasn't right. The attic hatch rattled ever so slightly. He rubbed his eyes, convinced he was imagining things, but the feeling of being watched lingered like a cold hand on his spine. Somewhere above, the stranger observed, patient and silent, a faint smile playing across their lips. Months of careful observation had gone unnoticed. They were invisible, untouchable, living in the very heart of the Harper home. And now they had all the knowledge they needed for what would come next. The night passed, and the family awoke to a bright morning, unsuspecting. Yet the unease Sarah felt, Ethan's fleeting glances at the ceiling, the way Michael paused by the kitchen door for no reason, they were all tiny cracks in the illusion of safety. Little did they know, the stranger in the attic was already planning the next move, waiting for the perfect moment to make their presence undeniable. And so life went on. Ordinary, quiet, and seemingly safe. The Harper family never suspected a thing. The Harper family tried to convince themselves that the house was normal. Morning routines continued with the same rhythm, Sarah preparing breakfast, Michael grabbing coffee, and Ethan rushing out for school. Yet small disruptions persisted, nagging at the edges of their consciousness. It began with minor things, a misplaced book here, a missing pair of socks there. Sarah noticed her keys were often in unusual spots, far from where she had left them. Michael assumed it was his forgetfulness, Sarah blamed exhaustion. Ethan, however, could no longer ignore the subtle signs. Each day he felt eyes watching him, as though the attic above was alive with unseen observation. One afternoon, Sarah returned home from work early, a mild headache making her sluggish. She noticed the kitchen light flicker, something she would normally dismiss as an electrical issue. But when she bit down to retrieve a cup from the cabinet, she noticed crumbs leading toward the hallway, crumbs she hadn't dropped. "Michael?" she called as he entered from the garage. "Did you—" He shook his head, frowning. "Nope. Maybe the dog?" They didn't own a dog. Sarah's stomach twisted. A chill ran down her spine as she glanced at the ceiling. Something above them was moving. She shook the thought away, telling herself she was imagining things, but the house felt different. Meanwhile, Ethan had his own encounter. While studying in his room, he noticed his textbooks were slightly rearranged. Pages marked with sticky notes he hadn't used yet had been turned, and his backpack was zipped differently than he had left it. A low thud echoed from the attic floorboards. His heart raced. He approached the attic door quietly, hand trembling as he reached for the knob. Nothing. He opened it a crack. Darkness stared back. He imagined shadows moving in the corners. A faint shuffling sound made him freeze. The attic seemed empty, yet he knew something or someone was there. That evening, the family gathered in the living room, attempting to brush off the day's oddities. Michael tried a joke. Maybe we're haunted. Maybe ghosts are moving our socks. Ethan laughed nervously, but even in jest, they couldn't shake the creeping tension. The intruder above them thrived on these moments. Every shift of the floorboard, every whisper of movement was carefully calculated. They had learned the family's routines, when Sarah left for work, when Michael went out for errands, and when Ethan was alone. They moved through the attic like a shadow, leaving subtle marks of their presence: a sock out of place, a sticky note turned, a cupboard slightly ajar. These were gentle reminders that the Harper home was no longer theirs alone. Then came the first clear sign that the intruder was willing to escalate. One morning, Sarah discovered a note tucked under her coffee cup. Written in small, precise handwriting, it read, "I see you. Always." She froze, staring at the words. Her coffee trembled in her hand. "Sarah, what is it?" Michael asked, peering over her shoulder. "It's nothing," she stammered, forcing a laugh. "Just a prank, probably." Michael shrugged, unconcerned. "Don't worry about it. Someone's messing with us." But Sarah knew it wasn't a prank. Whoever wrote that note knew details about her, the family, their home, and their routines, and only someone inside the house could have left it. Ethan, meanwhile, began hearing noises more frequently. At night, as he lay in bed, he heard faint scuffing from above. Sometimes he could hear a chair being dragged across the attic floor. His instincts screamed that someone was living up there, yet he had no proof. He tried telling Sarah, but she dismissed it as imagination. Michael didn't listen at all. One evening, the power went out during a thunderstorm. The house was plunged into darkness, and the only light came from the flickering flash of lightning. Sarah lit candles, trying to calm the growing unease. Suddenly, they heard the unmistakable sound of a floorboard creaking above the living room. It was deliberate, slow, deliberate enough to be unnerving. "Someone's up there," Ethan whispered, barely audible. Michael frowned. "Stop imagining things, Ethan." "No, Dad, I heard it. Someone's moving." Ethan's voice cracked with fear. Sarah's hands shook as she grabbed a flashlight. She shone it toward the ceiling, imagining what she would find. Nothing. Silence. Yet the unease lingered, thicker now, like a living presence pressing down on the house. That night, Sarah lay in bed, wide awake. Every small sound, the tick of the clock, the rustle of the wind, the distant drip of water felt magnified. Then came the unmistakable sound of the attic hatch rattling, a faint tap of fingers, as if someone was deliberately communicating without revealing themselves. Her heart raced. The intruder was there, and now they were daring her to notice. The next morning, small changes were noticeable. The pantry door slightly open, a few cans shifted, a pillow moved from the couch to the floor, and a strange odor lingering faintly in the hallway. Michael dismissed it as a draft or a misplacement. Sarah didn't say anything, though her pit of her stomach told her something was very wrong. Ethan, curious and terrified, began to investigate on his own. He crept up to the attic when no one was looking, listening intently. There he noticed faint footprints in the dust, evidence that someone had been walking deliberately, carefully just above him. His stomach churned. The evidence he had long feared was finally undeniable. Over the next few days, the intruder escalated further. Lights in rooms where no one was present flickered on and off. Drawers were subtly rearranged. Objects a family used daily, keys, remote controls, small household items were moved, but never enough to provoke immediate suspicion. The intruder had mastered the art of terror through ambiguity. They wanted the Harpers to feel watched, but never see them directly. One evening, Ethan returned home from school to find his bedroom door slightly ajar. He entered cautiously and noticed a small pile of his belongings neatly stacked in the middle of the floor. His laptop, school books, even his headphones. They weren't stolen, but they had been rearranged. Someone had been inside. His pulse quickened. He wanted to scream, to tell his parents, but a strange sense of fear held him back. The intruder had been patient, methodical, and invisible for months. He knew that alerting the family might provoke them, but also risk revealing the intruder's identity prematurely. Ethan was left with only a sinking realization. They were living among them. That night the family tried to sleep, but the sounds above, soft shuffles, faint taps, almost whispers, kept them awake. Sleep was uneasy, dreams disturbed by the sense of being observed. The intruder had planted themselves firmly in their lives, invisible yet omnipresent, forcing the Harpers to feel the first real taste of fear. The story of the Harper home had changed. It was no longer just a safe, quiet suburban house. It was a stage on which an unseen observer played, each day learning more, each night growing bolder, and the Harper family, unaware of the full extent of their visitors' presence, continued their routines, blissfully ignorant of the months of silent surveillance that had transformed their home into a carefully monitored cage. The storm outside had left the streets glistening, wet from rain, and the Harper house seemed eerily silent. Inside, tension hung thick, almost tangible, like a fog that refused to dissipate. Sarah, exhausted from another long shift, tried to focus on folding laundry in the living room. Michael was buried in work, headphones on, typing furiously, and Ethan was restless, the weight of weeks of unease pressing on him. He could no longer ignore the subtle disturbances, the inexplicable movements, the faint sounds that had been tormenting them all for months. Footsteps in the attic, whispers carried through vents, items slightly moved, but nothing concrete enough to convince his parents. Tonight, he decided, he would find the truth himself. Ethan waited until his parents were occupied. Michael had lost himself in a coding problem, Sarah had stepped into the kitchen for a snack, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. He grabbed a flashlight and quietly made his way toward the attic door. Heart pounding, hands shaking, he reached the knob. The attic was pitch dark, the only light coming from his flashlight beam. Dust motes danced in the weak circle of light, and the smell of old wood filled his nose. He took a deep breath, climbed the ladder slowly, each step creaking beneath his weight. Then he saw it, a corner of the attic that seemed unusual, a blanket tucked behind some boxes. With trembling hands, Ethan moved aside the boxes and gasped. There, neatly arranged with a small living space, a makeshift bed of old blankets, a few bottles of water, empty snack wrappers, and, most chillingly, items clearly taken from the Harper home. Socks, photographs, a notebook, even Ethan's headphones, all carefully organized. Whoever was living here had been watching them for months, cataloging their life down to the smallest detail. Ethan backed away, heart racing. Fear and anger collided in his chest. He had to tell his parents, but at the same time, the intruder could be anywhere, maybe even still in the shadows above. His mind raced, and he realized that confrontation was inevitable. Downstairs, Sarah was finishing a call when she heard a thud from the attic. It wasn't a floorboard settling or the wind. It was deliberate, unmistakable. Panic flared inside her, and she called Michael. "Michael, the attic, there's something." Michael sighed, exasperated, but followed her upstairs, Ethan leading the way. As they ascended, the first real fear set in. A floorboard creaked in a rhythm too deliberate to be random, and then they saw movement, a shadow flitting across the attic floor. The intruder revealed themselves, not in a frenzy, but with a chilling calm. A figure crouched among the boxes, eyes wide and alert, almost curious, observing the family as much as they were being observed. Who are you?" Michael stammered. The intruder tilted their head, a faint smile curling across their lips. "I've been here all along," they said softly. Their voice was calm, almost intimate, as though revealing a secret long kept. Sarah stepped back, clutching Ethan's hand. "Why? Why are you doing this?" The intruder's gaze swept over the family. "Because I wanted to know you, to see everything you do. I couldn't resist." The words made Sarah shiver. It wasn't madness in the sense of shouting or wildness. It was controlled, deliberate, a disturbing obsession that sent fear crawling up her spine. Ethan's anger flared. "You've been living here, spying on us, stealing our things?" The intruder nodded. "Not stealing, observing, learning. I've studied your routines, your habits, your life. I know when you wake, when you sleep, what you eat, even what you think you hide from each other." The family realized the full extent of the horror. The intruder had not only invaded their home physically, but had penetrated the sanctuary of their private lives. Every small disturbance, the missing keys, rearranged books, faint noises, had been carefully orchestrated. This person had become invisible, yet omnipresent, a silent witness to every intimate moment. Michael, protective now, stepped forward, his hand shaking. "Get out, now." The intruder didn't move. "Not yet, until I've seen it all." Their tone was calm, almost clinical, but it sent chills through every nerve in the room. Sarah felt her panic rising. She grabbed a nearby chair, ready to defend her family. Ethan, fueled by fear and courage, joined her. The intruders seemed to anticipate every move, stepping aside with unnerving agility, retreating into the deeper shadows of the attic. The confrontation became a tense standoff. Every movement, every breath was calculated. The intruder didn't attack physically, but the psychological pressure was suffocating. Their knowledge of the family's habits, their routines, their vulnerabilities, this was their weapon. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the attic. The intruder had knocked over a stack of boxes, creating chaos, but their calm demeanor remained. The family froze, heart pounding, unsure whether to pursue or retreat. Ethan noticed something, a notebook peeking out from under a blanket. He grabbed it. The pages were filled with meticulous observations, the family's schedules, habits, conversations. There were sketches, lists, and even notes about their fears. Every small detail of their lives had been cataloged, carefully analyzed. "This is insane," Ethan whispered, flipping through the pages. Sarah's hands trembled as she read over his shoulder. Michael, too, began to grasp the enormity of what had been happening for months. Their home, once a sanctuary, had been a theater for this intruder's obsession. The intruder's calm smile remained. "You're discovering what I've already known. But don't be afraid. I've taken care to not hurt anyone. Not yet." Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. "Not yet?" "Yes, but you must understand," the intruder continued. "I've grown attached. This house, your lives, it's fascinating." The realization hit them like a punch to the chest. This wasn't random. This was a planned, deliberate intrusion into their very existence, a psychological invasion designed to control and terrify without a single overt act of violence. The confrontation reached its peak when the intruder made a move to retreat further into the attic's shadows. Sarah instinctively lunged, grabbing the intruder's arm, while Michael blocked the escape. Ethan called the police, his voice shaking but firm. The intruder froze, then, almost imperceptibly, gave a slight nod as if acknowledging the inevitable. "Very well," they said softly, stepping back and raising their hands. "You've discovered me. That was always the risk." Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. The intruder, patient and observant as ever, did not resist. Police entered the home, carefully taking the stranger into custody. It was over, for now, but the Harper family would never forget the terror of the months they had unknowingly coexisted with someone in their own attic. Even as the intruder was led away, Sarah's mind raced. Every creak of the house, every shadow cast by the moonlight reminded her that their sanctuary had been violated. Ethan, though relieved, felt the lingering weight of fear. And Michael, stoic yet shaken, realized that the home they had trusted for years had never truly been theirs alone. The intruder had vanished from the attic, but their presence lingered in the Harper home, a ghost of obsession and control. And in the quiet moments, when the family tried to convince themselves that everything was normal again, they all knew one terrifying truth. Their lives had been infiltrated, and the stranger had seen everything. The house was silent, but for the Harper family, silence had a new meaning, one that whispered of shadows, observation, and the fragility of safety. The Harper house was quiet. Too quiet. For the first time in a week, the hum of tension had lifted, but the relief was hollow. Daniel sat in the study, staring at the phone on the desk. It had been hours since the police had taken Marcus Reed into custody, yet the air still felt heavy, as if the weight of the past refused to lift. Laura stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the darkening street. She had heard Daniel's confession, witnessed his vulnerability, and yet the wound ran deep. Trust, once broken, does not heal overnight. The affair, the lies, the blackmail, the threats to Emily, it had all left a mark on her heart, a scar she wasn't sure could fade. Emily sat on the stairs, phone in hand, scrolling through the messages she had sent to the retired detective. She felt a strange mix of pride and sorrow. She had uncovered the truth and forced the past into the light, but the consequences were heavier than she had imagined. The family she thought she knew, the life she had trusted, had been upended by a single text message, a tiny digital spark that had ignited a firestorm of secrets and lies. The police had reopened the cold case of the missing woman. Surveillance footage, long forgotten in an evidence locker, had surfaced. It showed the woman walking down a dimly lit alley late at night, followed at a distance by a shadowy figure. That figure was not Daniel. It was a man who had been known in the neighborhood for petty crimes, someone who had never been linked to the woman until now. DNA evidence confirmed it. The real killer had been found, decades-old lies finally catching up with the truth. For Daniel, the revelation was a bitter relief. He was innocent of murder, but the damage to his life, his family, and his reputation was undeniable. He had survived the storm, yet nothing would ever be the same. Laura turned to him, her voice quiet but firm. "You didn't kill her. I get that now. But Daniel, all those years of lies, the hiding, the secrets, how do I know what else you've kept from me?" Daniel reached out, but she stepped back. "I love you," he said, "and I know I failed you. I can't take back the past, but I can try to make the future right." Laura shook her head. "The future, Daniel, I don't know if that's possible anymore. I can't pretend everything is okay. I can't pretend the betrayal didn't happen. I need space." The words hit him like a physical blow. Divorce was no longer a distant thought. It was inevitable. Their marriage, once a fortress, was crumbling under the weight of his mistakes. Daniel nodded, swallowing hard, knowing there was no arguing with reality. Emily, sensing the finality of her parents' conversation, slipped to her room. She felt a quiet sadness, mourning the loss of the family she had taken for granted. Her childhood innocence had been replaced with a cold awareness. Life could change in an instant, and one small mistake or one text could unravel everything. Days passed. Marcus Reed faced charges for blackmail and harassment, but his motive was clear to the authorities. Years of grief and obsession had driven him to desperate measures. He didn't need to hurt Daniel, he needed the truth. But justice, as it often does, came in a form that could not undo the pain he had caused. The police continued their investigation, reviewing the reopened missing person case and interviewing Daniel thoroughly. The real killer, a man who had eluded justice for a decade, was finally in custody. The charges against Daniel were cleared, and his name was officially exonerated. Yet even with his innocence confirmed, the consequences of his past choices lingered. Daniel returned to the house he had called home, walking through rooms that felt unfamiliar. The walls were the same, the furniture unchanged, yet everything felt different. The perfect family image had been shattered. The truth had been revealed, the lies exposed, and the consequences, emotional, social, and personal, could not be undone. Laura packed her things slowly, methodical but detached. She had made her decision. Divorce papers were prepared. Daniel watched silently, heart aching, realizing that even though he had survived the legal storm, he had failed to protect the one thing he had valued most, his family's trust. Emily's departure for college came soon after. She hugged her father tightly, a mixture of love and sorrow in her embrace. "I'll be back for holidays," she said softly, trying to mask the grief in her voice. But as she left, Daniel felt the emptiness settle over the house, a reminder of how fragile life and trust could be. One evening, alone in the study, Daniel stared at the phone. The screen remained dark, quiet, but he knew the events of the past week would echo forever. A single text had triggered a series of consequences that no money, no apologies, no explanations could fully repair. The past had finally caught up with him. The blackmailer was gone, the real killer apprehended, yet the scars left behind were permanent. Daniel's career had ended, his marriage had crumbled, his daughter had left to begin her life in a world far from the chaos of their home. And yet there was one thing he could not escape, the lesson written in painful clarity across every ruined moment. One text, one mistake, one secret, no matter how small, could destroy a life. One moment of weakness could ripple outward, tearing apart everything you held dear. Daniel sank into the chair, head in hands, thinking of Emily, of Laura, of the home that once felt safe and warm. He thought of Marcus Reed, whose grief had turned him into a blackmailer, and of the woman who had disappeared, a life lost to circumstance and fear. The Harper family had survived the storm, but at what cost? Trust, innocence, love, all fractured. Some wounds could heal with time, but some scars remain forever. The truth had come out, justice had been served, yet the life they once knew would never return. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, a cold reminder that the world could shift in an instant. Inside, Daniel Harper sat alone, staring at the darkened phone, knowing that no matter how much he had learned, no matter how much justice had been served, one simple text message had changed everything, and the Harper family would never fully recover.